The topic for today's discussion is Hofstede's cultural onion and dimension. Before we go on to understand the concept, let us get some facts about Hofstede. Hofstede was an engineer and he worked with IBM. He then ventured into the field of psychology and became a social psychologist and then a professor. He is best known for developing one of the earliest and most popular frameworks for measuring cultural dimensions in a global perspective. He had conducted one of the most comprehensive studies of how values in the workplace are actually influenced by the culture we are brought up in. So before we go on to understand other concepts, let us understand what does actually culture mean. Culture, literally it means tilling the soil, which also means cultivation. Metaphorically, the word is used for training or refining of the mind, which is civilization. However, in the past decades, a broader metaphorical meaning has become very, very popular, which is derived from anthropology and which means collective ways of acting, thinking, and feeling. Therefore, we can define culture as the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from the others, right? So now we need to understand what is national culture and what is organizational culture. National culture belongs to the field of anthropology and it relates to the deeply held values regarding, for example, good versus evil, normal versus abnormal, rational versus irrational, right? So these are learned very, very early in age and they are deeply embedded and they can slowly change over the course of many, many generations, right? So it takes a lot of time from changing. So these are deeply embedded and they take a long time to be changed. Whereas organizational culture belongs to the field of sociology and is a set of broad guidelines which are rooted deep in organizational practices which are learned over a period of time or learned on the job. So why is culture and understanding culture very, very important for the management? Now we all know that as a management, as an HR person, we cannot change national culture. We can only bring about certain changes of the organizational culture, right? So, but we, as an HR person, we need to understand our national culture so that we can work in a collaborative environment and give objectives, achieve our objectives and goals of the organization. So, what culture is? It is a collective programming of the mind which manifests itself in several ways. And there are many terms used to describe manifestation of culture. So what are those terms? The first and the foremost is symbols. What are symbols? These are probably gestures, pictures, and objects which carry a particular meaning for those people who share the same culture. Probably Coca-Cola, Mercedes, or Chanel. So all these are symbols of the people who idolize or who look up to these symbols as representation of their culture or representation of their personality. So new symbols can easily be developed and the older ones can fade away, right? So that is why they are in the outermost layer. They are in the most superficial layer because it's easy to imbibe those symbols. It is easy to learn those symbols, right? And it's easy to replace those symbols. Then we move on to heroes. What are heroes? Heroes here are, they can be people who are alive or dead, real or imaginary, and they possess certain characteristics that are highly prized in our culture. For us, Mahatma Gandhi is a hero for us because of his activities, the things he's done for our country. So he has models of behaviors that we idolize with, right? For that matter, America might just idolize or look up to different set of heroes. For us, it's Mahatma Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose. So these are the people we look up to and we idolize, right? So it depends, it varies depending on the culture you come from. Then what are rituals? Rituals are collective activities and they are things like how I pray, or how a social or religious ceremony is conducted, how are business meetings organized. So all of them are together a ritual of the culture that we come from. For that matter, the people, how they pray in India is totally different from how they pray in the Western countries. So these are the daily to day on a daily basis. The activities that we carry out as rituals are the second innermost layer, second last layer. And the core is the values. Values are very strong emotions, and they have been inculcated over a period of long time. It has been the result of conditioning or upbringing, and it is developed very early in life, right? And it is the innermost circle. Therefore, it is difficult to change these value systems and conditioning. So you can reach up to the level of symbols, heroes, and rituals, but you can never reach the values because it is unconscious. It has been something that you've been brought up since you were a child. So it's very difficult to reach to those values which are core to the person or the culture. Now we need to understand Hofstede's sixth dimension of culture. The first is the power distance index, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance index, long versus short term orientation, indulgence versus restraint. Now let's go on to understand each one of it. Now the first one is the power distance index. This considers the extent to which inequality and power are tolerated. Right? In this dimension, inequality and power are viewed from the lower level, from the people who are working in the lower levels, right? And here, higher power index indicates that a culture accepts inequality and power differences and encourages bureaucracy, right? We are here at higher end. Whereas lower end, then we are at an egalitarian approach, that we encourage organizational structures that are flatter, that have decentralized decision making and a participative style of management. So if we fall here, we are pro-egalitarian. If we are here, then we are pro-bureaucracy and we respect hierarchy and all of that, right? Then we move on to collectivism and individualism. If we are very high on this, that means I'm just talking about I, me, my goals, my achievements, my objectives, my ultimate goals. It's me all the time. When we are talking about collectivism, it's placing greater importance to the well-being of the entire group or well-being of the group that I represent. So we together form collectivism. Here it is all I. Selfish, self-centered. It's just my goals and objectives, but here we are referring to the we, to the collective goals of that particular group. Then it is uncertainty avoidance index. This considers the extent to which uncertainty and ambiguity are tolerated. If I'm very high on this index, then I'm very uncomfortable with risk-taking, uncertainty, and ambiguity. I am not going to accept change very willingly. But if I'm here, I am very comfortable. I am very high on tolerating the uncertainty, the ambiguity, and risk-taking. Right? Then we move on to femininity and masculinity. Now, this dimension is also referred to as tough versus tender. We're not describing man and women or feminine or masculine. We are describing the characteristics. One is tough, masculinity, and femininity is tender. Therefore, it considers the preference of the society for achievement, attitude towards sexuality, equality, and behavior. So if you're really high on masculinity on this index, that this indicates that you are more concentrating on the material achievements, the wealth building aspect, right? But if you are low on this index, then you prefer fluid gender roles, you are nurturing by in terms of your behavior, and you are more concerned with the quality of your life, right? Then we move on to long-term orientation versus short-term orientation. If you're really high on this index, that means that you're more bothered about how your future is going to be, how you're going to plan. So you postpone the short-term success. You do not think about the short term goals. You are more concentrating on the long term goals, right? But if you are very low on this index, which shows that you focus on the near future, which involves delivering short term success, right? You place stronger emphasis on the present rather than the future. And the last is restraint versus indulgence dimension, which considers the extent and tendency for a society to fill its desires. If you're really high, that means you are indulging in things that give you happiness, like enjoying life, having fun. If you restrain yourself, that means you are just suppressing your happiness or your satisfaction, or you don't want to enjoy life to the utmost, right? So that's how Hofstede defines culture through these dimensions, and how people differ from each other culture on the basis of these dimensions. And we as HR person need to understand that all these cultures, the national culture, the corporate culture, the team culture, individual, all influence the culture, which is the culture we are working in, the professional culture, all have an impact on the way we work, on how we deal with people, how we coordinate with people. So each one of these cultures has an impact on how we work as a professional. I hope I made myself very clear. If you have any doubts, please leave it in the comments box.